My parents did not practice religion at home because my father was Taoist or Buddhist. My mother was actually Catholic. So I was not a baptized Catholic, but my mother, being a smart lady, sent me to convent school, which is a Catholic school. And then I became interested in the religion. I asked my father for permission, which he did not give. So when I went to Newcastle for my university, upon the age of 21, I decided that I would get myself baptized. So I was baptized in Newcastle. The priest at the chapel at Newcastle University, there's one thing that I remember him telling me, and that is distinguish between form and substance. So form is what we see a lot of in society. But what is more important is the substance behind the form. If there is no substance, then it rings hollow. So forget the trappings of status, of wealth and so on, but what is the substance that is behind any act that you do? I think that's one of the guiding principles for me in life. To talk about servant leadership, one of the significant acts that Christ did was the washing of feet. And the message that he gave to his apostles and disciples was that the leader should serve. So I think the concept of servant leadership derives from how Christ taught his disciples and how Christ provided the example or the model that one should follow. We first have to ask ourselves, in whatever we do, what is the purpose? What purpose drives what you do? If you're clear in your purpose, then that guides what should be done by you and your colleagues, your supporters. A very simple statement of purpose is, how can I be useful to others? That guided me in my work in NTUC. How can I be useful to workers, members of the trade union movement? And then currently, in my role as chairman of Temasek Holdings, how can I be useful to the country in the management of the wealth of the country? I have always taken it as a matter of course. If you are required to give of your time, if you think you're able, do it. If you find purpose and meaning in work, it becomes enjoyable. You derive great satisfaction if you succeed. So in that sense, then, it doesn't feel like a sacrifice. Making sacrifices in the public service is something regularly you have to do. It means sacrifice of time, of yourself, sacrifice of your time of your family. That is part of the cost. And I go back to the priest at Newcastle University. He says, God is everywhere. And all you have to do is, whenever you have a moment, right, to pray to Him. Pray to Him can mean just talk to God in your mind. You don't have to voice it out. When you have that moment of peace and quiet, just do that. And that's, generally speaking, how I have lived my life and my faith. Because my work takes a lot of my time, but within all that, I just then switch off everything else, and a couple of minutes, that's all you need.
So, ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome Mr. Boon Heng.
Monsignor Heng, Father Colin Tan, brothers and sisters in Christ. Without wise leadership, a nation falls. There is safety in having many advisors. Every country, every organization, every company needs leaders. The fortunes of each depends very much
on the quality of leadership. What are the attributes of leaders that we should look for? Exodus 18:21 says, "Moreover, look for able men from all the people, men who fear God, who are trustworthy and hate a bribe, and place such men over the people as chiefs of thousands, of hundreds, of fifties, and of tens." This is true today, as it was thousands of years ago. This passage from Exodus spells out in very simple terms the foundational thinking for the rules and regulations that make for good governance. But it places less reliance on rules and regulations. Instead, it urges us to find able leaders who are God-fearing and honest. And how wise this is. When we have honest people in charge, we need less rules and regulations. We spend too much time on framing rules and regulations, on enforcing those rules and regulations, and far too little time on forming honest men and women. I pause here because I think this is what we have to reflect of our society today. Monsignor Heng talks about secularism. So we spend far too little time on forming honest men and women. Now, what must leaders be reminded of constantly? Proverbs 4:23 says, "Above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it." From what we do, in time, people will know our heart's intent. Our intentions are seen in our actions. People then decide whether we are trustworthy, whether we are leaders they will follow. Monsignor Heng talks about authenticity. So, above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it. And leaders should be guided by the two great commandments. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind and with all your strength. Love your neighbor as yourself. And the way to follow these two great commandments is do unto others as you would have them do unto you. You don't need to remember the 10 Commandments. You don't need to know all the laws and regulations. Follow this golden rule. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. This is also called the golden rule. It's a rule for everyone who follows Christ, and also for everyone who, for whatever reason, does not follow Christ. And earlier, in Exodus 18:21, which has flashed just now, it spells out the organizational structure very much like what we use today, and at each level, we need men and women who are God-fearing, honest, and able. But what is the right leadership style? You know that those who are considered rulers over the Gentiles lord it over them, and the Greek ones exercise authority over them. Yet it shall not be so among you. But whoever desires to become great among you shall be your servant, and whoever of you desires to be first shall be slave of all. For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. So many adopt this command and control system. But Christ preached a different system. He followed through his teaching in his own act of humility of washing his disciples' feet at the Last Supper. Based on Christ's teaching, several thinkers have developed a model for servant leadership. First, define your purpose. Second, invert the organizational hierarchy or upend the pyramid. The role of the leader is to help his followers or subordinates to succeed. The third is to raise the bar, to set high goals. The fourth is to show the way or to blaze the trail. The fifth, to build on strength. But to get our thinking right, we should view this as an inverted pyramid. Purpose, upend the pyramid, raise the bar, blaze the trail, build on strength. And because we invert the pyramid, we see where the leader should stand at the bottom, supporting the subordinates. And that is the perspective of a servant leader. And a servant leader helps his colleagues and subordinates to succeed. And the characteristics of a servant leader are, first, values diverse opinions. That means a leader listens. Second, cultivates a culture of trust. Third, develops other leaders. Fourth, helps people with life issues. You must not only work, know your colleagues, support them when they have problems. Fifth, encourages. A word of commendation now and then goes a long way. Six, sells instead of tells. There is persuasion. Many organizations strive for alignment. When people are persuaded, they are aligned. 7, think you, not me. It should never be about me. It should be about you, your subordinates, your customers. 8, think long term. Learn from the past, and then with foresight, conceptualize. 9, acts with humility. 10, takes on the role of a steward. Now, servant leadership is founded on values, and within those 10 points, there are different values. And values come from a deep sense of purpose. And what is that deep sense of purpose? For some, it's doing God's work on earth. What can I do that makes life better for my neighbor? For others, it is, how can I uplift the lives of people? And yet for others, how can I help build a warmer community? Now, given the career that I've had, you would expect me to discuss purpose in politics as well as in business. First, how does a political leader define purpose? A question which I think all politicians the world over have to reflect today. What is that purpose? May 27th May 1965, in a heated debate in the Malaysian Parliament, Mr. Lee Kuan Yew said, "I don't trade in people's miseries. My business is the people's happiness. My business is the people's happiness." Now, this is not one of Lee Kuan Yew's more famous quotes. As I said, buried in a long, passionate debate in the Malaysian Parliament in May 1965. And not long after, on the 9th of August 1965, just a couple of months later, Mr. Lee Kuan Yew proclaimed the independence of Singapore, and the essential part of the proclamation was, "Now I, Lee Kuan Yew, Prime Minister of Singapore, do hereby proclaim and declare, on behalf of the people and the government of Singapore, that as from today, the 9th day of August in the year 1965, Singapore shall forever be a sovereign, democratic, and independent nation, founded on the principles of liberty and justice, and ever seeking the welfare and happiness of a people in a more just and equal society." The same point, the people's happiness. Shortly after, Mr. Lee Kuan Yew said this: 100 years ago, this was a mud-flat swamp. Today, this is a modern city. 10 years from now, this will be a metropolis. Never fear. So it was a restatement of purpose in words that people can relate to. It was a statement that calms and inspires the people. Now, how did I frame purpose in my own career in politics and the trade unions? I've been asked many times, not directly about purpose, but about how I reconcile the conflict of interest, being at the same time a member of the cabinet and the leader of the trade union movement. I asked myself, what is the purpose of a good government? My answer, the purpose of a good government is to uplift the lives of the people. Next, I ask, what is the purpose of a trade union? My answer, it is to uplift the lives of workers and their families. It is apparent that people, workers, and their families are the same. So long as I stay true to the purpose of government and unions, I did not encounter a conflict of interest in holding two roles. I learned early in my trade union career that we work in order to have the means to provide a good life for our families. And this led to the question, what is the purpose of a business? And I concluded that the purpose of a business should be to make life better for people. It is not a new concept. In classical Greece, business were expected to be of service to the community. In the medieval period, a good businessman must be honest in intention and actions, and is expected to use his profits in a socially responsible way. Now, several old British and US businesses subscribe to the Quaker ethic. The Quakers are a branch of Christianity. They felt persecuted in the UK. They moved to the United States. But the Quakers ran several businesses. And the Quaker ethic in business is summarized by this statement. The real goal for an employer is to seek for others the best life of which they are capable. So likewise, in Asia, businesses have contributed back to society, building roads, repairing bridges, and building schools. And here in Singapore, an earlier generation of businessmen have contributed much to society. For example, the late Mr. Lien Chow, founder of the Overseas Union Bank, now part of UOB, donated half his fortune to the Lien Foundation in 1980. Singaporeans knew him as Lien Chow. Catholics knew him as George Lien. And yes, businesses have contributed to building and maintaining places of worship, contributing to the spiritual life of people. Such businesses have been a minority in many phases of our history, but the framework of ethical capitalism has existed for a long time. There is no doubt that businesses are the primary sources of wealth creation, innovation, and employment. The framework of ethical capitalism is built upon the strong belief that businesses exist to contribute to the development of the communities in which they operate. Businesses serve not only shareholders, but all stakeholders. And stakeholders include employees, customers, business partners, and the community. Businesses serve society by making profit, but profit is the means, not the end. And Japanese leader Konosuke Matsushita put this well. Some people think that the purpose of an enterprise is to make profit. Indeed, profit is indispensable for conducting proper enterprise activities. However, profit in itself is not the ultimate goal of an enterprise. More basic is the effort to improve human life through enterprise management. And profit becomes important and necessary only to better pursue this basic mission. Therefore, a business should serve the interests of all stakeholders and not, as Milton Friedman asserted, that the sole responsibility of a company is to its shareholders to maximize returns to shareholders. Milton Friedman is a Nobel laureate, and 30, 40 years ago he said this. And American businesses have followed this closely. And it's why I think we have the world we have today. And there's much angst and anger in the world today. It is the result of the pursuit of maximum returns for shareholders and failure to address the impact of underlying trends on people. And these underlying trends are rising income inequality, disruptive technology, aging populations, climate change. If our purpose is to improve human life, as Konosuke Matsushita said, or to seek for others the best life of which they are capable, as the Quakers put it, then it is incumbent on all business leaders to make our businesses fit for the future and ensure that our people are future ready. That is what doing Christ's work in the workplace is about for business leaders. Rising income inequality is a hot issue now. In many countries, especially in developed ones, middle-income wages have stagnated or declined. The middle income have staged protests and demonstrations, some resulting in violence and death. And the current one is what's happening in Chile. Related to this, you can say, is what's happening in Hong Kong. Now, the fundamental purpose of business, the fundamental principle of fairness has been recognized for a long time. And for example, the importance of fairness was highlighted by Mr. Lee Kuan Yew way back in 1969 on this stage, 1969, 16 November 1969. And he said, legislation can prohibit and punish abuses and malpractices, but it cannot give that positive urge to work and to achieve. This urge can come only from the conviction of a people that they must and want to give of their best. It is a consciousness of our being co-owners of the new society we are creating that provides the drive for fulfillment. And in multiracial countries like ours, trade unions have a special role in building up this spirit of camaraderie amongst workers and developing the economy, increasing productivity, increasing returns. This makes sense only when fair play and fair shares make it worth everyone's while to bring his share of effort for group survival and group prosperity. So 50 years ago. While income inequality is a global issue, here in Singapore, we have to decide how we should share the fruits of wealth creation. One is for governments to redistribute wealth. There is considerable redistribution of wealth in welfare states. But that has not stopped rising anger. Although most Singaporeans don't appreciate it, there is considerable wealth redistribution here. Targeted redistribution for greater effect. And yet, the unhappiness over income inequality bubbles. What should business leaders do? Technology is disrupting many jobs. What can we do to enable workers to manage change? When new skills are required, how do we help our employees acquire those skills? How do we take care of workers' welfare in the gig economy? And those in the gig economy in Singapore don't contribute to CPF, and so don't have good provision for their social security. Our population is aging, like in many developed countries. We are living longer. How do we enable seniors to live in dignity? One of the ways is to enable them to work longer, but it also depends on whether employees are healthy. So what responsibility has a business leader for his employees' health? Climate change will not just mean future generations have to cope with living with higher temperatures and exposure to certain diseases. Businesses will be disrupted too. What is our duty to future generations? A good steward hands over to his successor his organization in better shape than when he received it. Each generation should hand over the world to the next in better shape than when we arrive. Sadly, on climate change, we are failing in our duties. But there is hope. The United Nations released its Sustainable Development Goals, and several leading businesses rallied around it. And recently, the Business Roundtable in the United States issued a statement stating clearly that the duty of business is to stakeholders and not just shareholders. So there is hope. Finally, at some point, leaders must pass the baton to the next generation. If we are to be good stewards, how do we prepare our successors? I leave you many questions. But dealing with these issues is doing Christ's work at the workplace. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Boon Heng, ladies and gentlemen.